Hello, everybody.
Hello, Dr. Lamb.
Hello. Shalom Aleichem.
How are we doing? Just get the Zoom up and running. Hello, Jeff. Hello, Darren. Hello, Robbie. Get the Zoom up and running. Will Peter be joining us virtually or physically? That's okay. Sorry.
Is he allowed to do?
Was he allowed to? But our Thursday Tzurba Shiur will not be happening this week because we've got Rabbi Ramon's Shiur on Thursday night in parallel. Okay, let me just get this. We're on page 288. That's where we're holding. Page 288. We're discussing Zman Tefillah. Machal. Okay. We're discussing Zman Tefillah. Thank you. Sorry. Go on, a little one. Encourage people to come in person. And well, on the camera's not. There we go. Okay. So we were discussing Zman Tefillah, and obviously last time we discussed Zman Kriyat Shema, and we discussed the different Zmanim. We discussed the Machloket between the Gra and the Magen Avraham. Remember, Michael? Yep. And regarding Sof Zman Kriyat Shema, and then we proceeded last time to discuss Zman Tefillah. And the real question we discussed was the legitimacy of davening Tefillah, davening Shmoneh Esrei before Hanetz Chama, before sunrise. And we saw that it perhaps might, at least how the Mishnah Berurah Shulchan Aruch understand it, might not be the lechatchila option to daven before Nates unless somebody has to go to work or the like. And that's sort of where we left things last time. I'll just share screen. We're on page 288. Just share screen. Kosh Australia. Okay. So we are on page 288. And so we discussed last time, okay? Remember what we're holding? We spoke about that. We end off last time the Isha Yisrael, who said that even somebody has to go out to work, that's considered Yotzei Laderech. It's equivalent of somebody who's going off on a journey, and they have dispensation to daven before Hanes, before sunrise. And the question is, though, if you're in a town and you don't need to go somewhere, you don't need to daven early before Nates. Hello, Isaac. But the only minyan in town is before Nates. Is it better to daven with a minyan before Nates, or to daven b'yechidut on one's own after Nates? Somebody who's not in a rush to go to work. Is it better to daven with a minyan before Nates or on one's own after Nates? So there's a three-way machloket sort of about trying to understand this as they present it here. We'll start with the Igrot Moshe. We're on page 288, source 13. Rav Moshe Feinstein. He is perhaps one of the biggest makilim when it comes to the question of davening before Nates, and says quite simply that when we spoke about our obsession with davening with Nates, that meant for the precise moment of Nates, right? That to the idea, the beauty we spoke about davening Vatikin, davening like the Vatikin did, as the Gemara in Brachot, that as the sun goes over the horizon, that you start your Amida. But if you're not actually going to do literally Nates, then it makes not really much difference if you daven before or after Nates. They're both legitimate, and that is the opinion of the Igrot Moshe. So let's see it inside in source 13. Says Rav Moshe.
And you say those on page what?
Page 288, source 13.
Are we looking in?
Tzurba volume 10.
Oh.
You've been out for a couple of months. This is what happens. Stay there. All good. What are you in? Are you in Yoredeh? You've got something on Kashrut there or something?
Which volume?
All good.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was
Feel free
was
to follow on the screen then.
in volume 11.
Volume 11. Oh, well, you're ahead. What can I say?
Yes.
Okay, so you can follow on the screen. Okay,
I know I've got the book now. It's fine. Thank you.
okay, great. So it says Rav Moshe Feinstein as follows in source 13. V'hinei, behold, lolei de mistafina. If I wasn't so scared or hesitant, Haiti Omer, I would go so far to say, says Rav Moshe Feinstein, the bitfila shekneged tzmidim tiknu. That since we know tefillah were, as according to the Gemara Brachot Daf Kaf Vav, constitutes parallel to the Korban Tamid, leka kala shir dar kala. There's no requirement that the earliest time is recognizing somebody from 4 amot away, which we discussed previously. Nor is it dependent on this rule that a matter whose mitzvah has to be done during the day should be done after sunrise. That's a general halacha that we have with many things, that a mitzvah like Kriyat Megillah, for example, or Netilat Lulav, or shofar, for example, which are things which have to be done in the daytime, that lachatchila they're supposed to be done after sunrise. That's what the Mishnah Masechet Megillah teaches us. Feinstein here says that doesn't apply necessarily to tefillah.
Thank you.
Barak b'diavad yatsa gam kshela amot hashachar. And to say that only b'diavad after it's good enough to do it from dawn. So Rav Moshe Feinstein teaches us that according to him, that's not the case when it comes to tefillah. So over the page, 289. So he says, Ella ikka b'tefillah din acher. There's another halacha when it comes to tefillah. Shemitzvato lechatchila kevatikin. That rule about nates was only ever about specific moment to daven like the vatikin daven. To daven literally as the sun comes up. The hu im hanet zachama. Right? Mikrad Rabbi Zera, like Rabbi Zera learns from the pasuk, Yira'ucha im shemesh, right? That they should see you or they should feel you with the sun. V'hu b'tzimtzum gadol, which is an exact precise moment. People joined us. Lo kodem v'lo achar zeh, neither before nor after. There's no special halacha, says Rav Moshe Feinstein, that it has to be dafka after nets, but rather at nets. And before and after are both substandard. The chachachila has to be at the moment of sunrise. The Peresha Breita im haneit sachama, right? The Breita says with the sunrise, who dafka az v'lo mu'uchar mizeh, neither before nor later. Im ken efshar sheshavin ma'alot hashachar ad hanetz le'inyan tefillah komo me'achar shiur deme'im hanetz ad gimul shalot. If so, it could be, says Rav Moshe Feinstein, that davening before sunrise is no different to davening after nates up to 3 hours, or up to 4 hours even. The idea being that what? The lechatchila was to daven literally with nets. But if I'm not going to actually daven nates, then it makes no difference, says Rav Moshe Feinstein, if I daven before or if I daven afterwards. I stopped doing the hand actions now, stop filming me, right? Okay, so there you go. Rav Moshe Feinstein says it black and white, that nates is the hidur. And if you're not going to do literally nates, which would mean that every day your davening moves by a minute, basically, and no minyan is really tenable. In Israel, you have nates minyanim, but in people who work, it's difficult to do that. Sorry?
There's a nates minyan.
There's an nates minyan here? Every day? Yeah, it does. Well, you know, I said people who work. So. Okay, let's say that. All right, I'll get in trouble for that. I'm on recording. Oh, no. Okay, let's say that. Okay. So if it's not tenable to do it with the nates, according to Moshe Feinstein, it makes a difference if it's before or afterwards. This is the opinion of the Igrat Moshe. Yes, Aaron, what were you going to ask?
There's a fundamental question there. When were the daily sacrifices? When was the Tamid?
Oh,
It wasn't offered.
it wasn't before nates, right?
That's right.
You're right. Very good question that it wasn't before nates. But that doesn't mean that it wasn't legitimate to daven before nates. So it wasn't kosher necessarily. Certainly, it could be that it's b'diavad it was. But tefillah, says Rav Moshe Feinstein, never was subject to those rules of like shofar or the like. But you're right. The korban tamid was not offered typically before nates.
Yeah.
It's a good raya. But Rav Moshe Feinstein is not the only opinion. Rav Moshe Feinstein held that when you look at actually the Gemaras about tefillah, you're right about the tamid. When you actually look at the Gemaras about tefillah, the requirement was only nets, and all the Gemaras we discussed last week was the moment of nets. Not that the moment of nets is the earliest point. It's just that the hidur is to daven with nets. But if you're not doing that, before or after might be good enough. Okay. Which means, according to this, that even if you're not rushing out to work, it might be that you're allowed to daven before nets. And this is what many people in Chutz La'aretz especially rely on, that we daven on the 6:30 minyan for sure. 7 minyan right now in the winter is before nets. And they rely on this from Moshe Feinstein, even if people are not running out to work. Nets now is probably we're more or less up to the nets now in the 7 minyan. You want to know? If I go to Mais Money,
It's just before 7:30.
there you go. Mais Money for Melbourne. So there we go. Actually 7:20. So depending who's davening tomorrow, we might be davening Vatikan tomorrow. If whoever gets up from the Amid, if it takes their time, and we get to Amida at 7:20.
We might finish before nets.
We might finish before nets, right? Okay, depends who's davening. So the 7 o'clock tomorrow. Okay. So let's just go on. Let's just go on. I just want to skip to the last paragraph there where it gets bold at the end of source 13. Says Rav Moshe Feinstein, according to what he said, his chidush, v'yu mutarin af elu she'ein lehem tchak gadol. Therefore, it would be mutter even those who are not in a time of great need. Even if you're not rushing out to work, you'd be allowed to daven. Ella shelo yuchlu lehitpalel b'tzibur mishum de'en bekila en minyan echad, and therefore they'll not be able to pray with the zibur because they only have 1 minyan. So if you don't have the option to go to a late minyan, so Rav Moshe Feinstein, it's okay. You can go to the earlier minyan. Because they have to go to the early minyan because the people have only an early minyan in town. If they don't have a 7:30 minyan in your town, because you've got to go to work. That's like a shatat gadol. The only minyan in town is an early minyan for them. They're allowed to daven early. And Rav Moshe Feinstein therefore says that you should definitely go to the early minyan rather than go to the late minyan if it's either that or daven by yourself, based on everything that we've said. But this wasn't agreed by everyone. First, there's the middle opinion of the Minchat Yitzchak, Rabbi Yitzchak Yaakov Weiss. He was out baked in Manchester, and then he was head of the Eder Charedis. This is not Rav Weiss who just passed away in Israel. That was different Rav Weiss. But the Minchat Yitzchak rules as follows in source 14. He has a bit of a middle opinion. This is Rabbi Yitzchak Peterburg, who was a Rav in Lithuania in the 19th century. What does he say? He says, regarding the question, what is better? Is it better to daven with a minyan before sunrise, or to daven on one's own after sunrise? Because he's unable to daven like the Vatikan literally as the sun rises. Over the page, Yesh Lomar answered the Pri Yitzchak, that the best thing to do is have a rak im hashemesh mamash. It's only literally as the sun rises with Vatikin. Right? Kamash katav atosfa the ikar chavivat mitzvah im hashemesh mamash. Literally with the sun. V'chen ba'em divrei Rabbeinu Yonah, as we saw in Rabbeinu Yonah, ayin sham. V'after yesh lomar, and although you might say the mikol makom mikra dirucha im shemesh mash meyeh al kol panim bayom, even though the pasuk yiraucha im shemesh implies it's got to be daytime, that's not necessarily true. V'al ken, and therefore Tov yotel hitpalel b'tzibur kodem hanet. It's better to daven with a minyan before sunrise, hitpalel achar kach b'yechidut, than to daven on one's own after sunrise. Ad kantam sit dvarav. End quote of the Pri Yitzchak. Says Minchat Yitzchak on this. V'hine, behold, afle didei, even according to that opinion, that's dafka le'inyan adifut lehitpalel b'tzibur. That's only if you have a choice between davening with a minyan before nates or davening on one's own after nates. That's how he passed in this way. But certainly, im yuchal hitpalel b'tzibur achar hanetz yesh lo adifut mibekodem hanetz. If you're not going to work and you have 2 minyanim in town, and you can daven before nates or after nates, and you're not in a hurry, Minchat Yitzchak says it's better to go to the later minyan, which is after nates. Afim lo have im hanetz mamash, even if it's not literally sunrise. So here he's cholak on Rav Moshe Feinstein and says, when is it that you should go to the early minyan? That's only if that's the only minyan in town. But if there's also a 7:30 minyan and you're not being rushed to work, according to the Minchat Yitzchak, one should go to the minyan after nets. It doesn't mean literally with sunrise, but rather after the sun has risen and spread, but olam, around the world. Like we say regarding tefillah, Rabbi Yossi, the same way we say about mincha, that Rabbi Yossi said that my portion should be with those who daven with the sunset. It doesn't mean literally at sunset, it means as the sun is going down. While the sun is still over the earth. Does man tefillah achar hanetz? So davening is after netz, v'lo im hanetz dafka, not dafka as the sun rises. Imken, therefore, says the Mincha Yitzchak, v'dai im haberer b'adam, certainly if you have a choice, shrichim livchol hitpalel b'tzibur achar hanetz achama, after mi'efsha im hanetz dafka. Then one should daven, if there's 2 minyanim in town and you don't have to rush off to work, daven with the minyan after netz. That is the psak of the Mincha Yitzchak against Rav Moshe Feinstein in this regard. But the Yalkut Yosef, Rav Yitzchak Yosef, has an even more extreme position. So we've seen Rav Moshe Feinstein, who says it's fine to daven with the minyan before. Mincha Yitzchak, who has it's in the middle. And now Rav Yalkut Yosef, who says it's even better to daven on one's own after netz than to daven with people who have to rush to work before netz if you yourself are not in a rush. Look in source 15, this is the Yalkut Yosef. Misha ef shalol hitpalel im hanetz. And then I'll add my own little 2 cents, if that's okay. Misha ef shalol hitpalel im hanetz ola achar meken. Somebody who's able to daven with netz or afterwards, eino rashai lahakdim hitpalel im minyan shal poalim achar matashachar. Somebody who's able to daven after netz is not permitted, says the Yalkut Yosef, to daven in the early minyan when people have to rush out to work. Ki lo hutar lepoalim hitpalel bisman kazeh. Because it was only permitted for workers to daven at this early time, because it's a time of great need for them. It's like B'di'eved. Aval, however, says Yalkut Yosef over the page, somebody's able to daven with nates or after nates. Eino rashai l'hitpalel tefillah shel diavad, is not permitted to do this b'diavad, thing to daven before nets. So the Yalkut Yosef is particularly machmir regarding this, and he says, and what if they need you for a minyan? He says still you shouldn't daven with them. You should just be there as a filler in. He says va'afilu im hem zkukim lo lahashlim haminyan, even if they need him to complete the minyan, da'il al-hitzaref alayim not kaddish kedusha or baruchu. Only join them to answer Kaddish, Kedusha, and Baruchu. But you should really, if you're not in a rush, you should daven after nates. And he goes so far to say, even if that's the only minyan in town, the early minyan of workers, it's better for one to daven after nates on one's own than to daven a tefillah which people are only yotze b'diavad. So in the opposite direction of Moshe Feinstein, he says the opposite. He says that even if it's the only minyan in town, if you are not in a rush to go to work, it's better you daven on your own after nates than to go to the only minyan in town if it's before nates. That is the Rav Yalkut, the Rav Yitzchak Yosef, the Yalkut Yosef rules in reverse to Rav Moshe Feinstein. Now, there's a different thing. The contemporary thing is not to Pascal like Rav Yitzchak Yosef, certainly in Chutz La'aretz, and rather, the majority does go like Rav Moshe Feinstein that one should daven with the minyan before sunrise, certainly if that's the only minyan in town, than to daven b'yechidut outside. And I said I'd add my couple of cents worth here. I really think that Laniut Da'ati, that whilst Rav Yitzchak Yosef has made an important point about the virtues of nets, and that might be true regarding minyanim in Israel or where there's minyanim all the time in Israel. When you think about what it is to be in Chutz La'aretz, when you think about what it does to a community, look, we know it best from COVID and what COVID did to our minyanim. That to tell people it's better to daven at your home, in your home after nets than to go to shul with a minyan could be detrimental to communities which rely on their balei batim for minyanim, and we've seen that in COVID. And therefore, whilst Rav Yitzchak Yosef's words might be correct for like a place like Israel, when it comes to community, like in Chutz La'aretz, like Rav Moshe Feinstein is really on the money here in terms of understanding what it means for it to have minyanim in Chutz La'aretz and to support minyanim, and to rely on a more lenient position regarding nates for the good of the Kehillah. And I think I said the last couple of years have sort of shown us the importance of getting people into shul and not telling them to be machmir and to daven throughout the winter on their own, basically. I think that's an important point for us to think about as a community. That's my own couple of cents on this. But if you look in source 16 here, the Pitkei Teshuvot, Rav Rabinowitz also says that the consensus is more like Rav Moshe Feinstein. So look in source 16, it says the Pitkei Teshuvot, Misha nimtza b'makom she'ein sham ela minyan mitpalim shmona esrei lifnei hanetz. If the only minyan in town is where they get to Amida before sunrise, yesh lo lahadiv hitpalel b'tzibur imahem, it's still better to go to shul and daven before nates, me'ashel hitpalel achar hanetz v'yichidut, than to daven after sunrise on one's own. Omnam, however, zot b'tnai, this is on condition, shehaminyan mitpalel shmona esrei achar she'eh hamizrach. This is after at least the east has been illuminated, right? The Giyazman Mishayakir. They've got to at least be at Mishayakir. And typically that is what we do. Even the 6:30 minyan, they only put on tefillin from Mishayakir and even in the winter. Omnam, however, yesh cholkim, there are those who disagree, the sovereign and hold, like we saw in the Alkut Yosef, shebechol inyan adif litpalel achar hanetz b'yichidut melifnei hanetz b'sibra, that it's always better to daven after next. We saw the Rav Yitzchak Yosef brought that in the Alkut Yosef. Nonetheless, we saw the position of Moshe Feinstein and even that of the Mincha Yitzchak, who says even though it's best to daven after nets, if the only minyan in town is before nets, you should go to the minyan rather than to daven on one's own. So that is the psak based in this manner. So as I said,
Who is that rabbi? Rabbi Rabinowitz, who is he?
Rav Rabinowitz, he's still alive. He's Rav in Israel. He put together a sefer called the Piskei Teshuvot, where he brings all sorts of different, basically achronim from the recent times, and summarizes them in a sefer. So based on the order of the Mishnah Berurah especially and others, but there's a whole set you can buy called the Piskei Teshuvot. I think it's Rav.
Okay.
I think it's Rav Simcha Rabinowitz, I believe. Is it? Rav Simcha ben Sion Isaac Rabinowitz. There you go. The Rav of Mishkanot Yaakov in Yerushalayim. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So that's okay. That was regarding that. If we go over the page, I lost it. Okay, we're on page 292 now. Okay. So we did say that despite this, that the Gemara had shown given great credence to the idea of davening like the Vatikin, who would daven with sunrise. And we saw here that there was really like a whole process here in the poskim, what we saw previously regarding this. The Rambam seemed to really rule that everyone should be doing Vatikin every day. We should all be davening with the sun, like in the Hadas, right? And we saw that in the Rambam was very strong regarding this, and therefore he said, "V'im avar v'lo hitpalel." If somebody, deliberately didn't daven, implies that it's wrong to not daven Vatikin every day. Whereas the Shulchan Aruch had a bit of a softer tone regarding it. Said it's meshubach, it's praiseworthy to daven Vatikin, but he didn't make it a requirement in the same way that the Rambam did. Have a look at the Alkut Yosef again, who takes a hardline position on the idea of actually davening Vatikin every day if you're able to. Look in source 17. Says the Alkut Yosef. Even though she'ein hatfila b'hanetz chiyuv gamor api halacha, even though we don't actually pass like the Rambam, and it's not really a full obligation to daven literally with the sunrise every day, nonetheless, we already know the Maila, right? The elevated status of davening with the sunrise. She'amru Gemara, like the Gemara told us, Vatikin hayu gorim ota im hanetz achama, that the Vatikin would finish Shema with the sunrise, Kadesha Yismach Geula Letfila, right? As we saw. And they'd start their Amida with the sunrise. Of Rishalmi Amru al Rabbi Yossi, it's told in the Rishalmi about Rabbi Yossi, Shehaya Mitzpalel Imdum Dmei Chama, that he would daven with the reddening of the sun, right? Dam is blood, so it's red. So Dim Dmei Chama is the reddening of the sun. Kadeshi Hey Alav Mora Shemaim Kol Hayom, to have the reverence of heaven all day on him. And the Rivash said in his will, it's really good to do this, to daven nates every day if you can. Somebody who davens nates every day will not sin that day. And therefore, says the Alkut Yosef, so a person should really try to daven nates every day. Kvarnit be'elel was already clarified earlier. B'nei Torah she'imit palu imanet the rayafrulem b'limudam. B'nei Torah yeshiva people, if they daven nates every day, it's going to disturb their learning schedule and impact their learning. It's always the B'nei Torah get the heter, right? Adif sheyit palu achar hanes. It's better they daven later. They should have a sleep, no, right? Kadesha yichlu lahatmit, so they can learn, be masmidim, that they can learn, constantly and uninterrupted. So the Yalkut Yosef really here does recommend that really everyone should be trying to do nets, ideally though. He doesn't say it's just like an extra virtue, but really we should be trying to doing it unless there's bittul Torah, which is going to be caused. But as I said, the Shulchan Aruch, the Pshat Shulchan Aruch is, unlike the Rambam, is to bring it as like a milah, something which is definitely a praiseworthy thing to do, but certainly not a requirement, in contrast to the Rambam. Okay, but as I said, if you go to the 7 o'clock this week, and certainly next week, then you'll be davening nates every day, basically, and like the Vatican, because you'll get to Amida. Sorry, you want me for a minute? Well, definitely tomorrow. We'll see. We'll see after that. Yes.
Tomorrow nates is 7:21.
So tell the guy to slow down a minute or two, and then we'll all be davening next. If we get to Amida, start of Amida at 7:21, we get to daven like the Vatican. Sorry, you won't have a minyan for Kaddish, just say, yeah.
But what would happen? Does it not count if the Shliach Tzibur does it with the nates? We're all joining him.
But your private Amida is before nates.
The private Amida will be before, but the Shliach Tzibur does it for everybody. He does it at the right time.
He does, but we haven't. So I'm not sure that really counts. Unless you want to have kavana for the Shliach Tzibur to be yotze with him. It's an extra chumrah of Dr. Danny Lamb. He's choshesh, for this Yitzchak Yosef, Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef. Yeah, the Yalkut Yosef. Okay, lots of chumras.
Yeah.
Okay. Beseder. Okay. So now let's look at, I lost the title here. There we go. Okay. Davening, right? Okay, so very good. So before we discussed what's the case if there's only 1 minyan in town before sunrise, or davening by myself after sunrise, and we saw the different positions there. What about, I just lost it, page 2. Yeah, okay. What is it better to go to, what if I can daven after sunrise at 7:30, or I can daven nates at home at the exact time that in the calendars the sun goes over the horizon? Is that better than davening with a minyan? To daven like the Vatican, or should I daven later with a minyan? Shabbos, let's say, for example. So late, right? Shul's 7:30 never. 9:30. Hashgam was 7:30, right? Shul's 9:30. Maybe I should get up and daven at 7 and do nates, and then just come for Musaf. Is it better to daven nates than to daven later, not nates? So let's see. But
if you daven at 9:30 or 7:30, it's the same.
Correct. Yes.
In this context.
Yes. And the question is, though, is it better to daven nates at the exact and reach Amida at the exact moment the sun goes over the horizon, which is what the Vatican used to do, or to wait till a later minyan? Okay, because we spoke about the virtues of Vatican. So the Bir Halacha discusses this. So he says people who are generally careful with it can do this. They can daven if there's something that they're careful to do. Look in source 18. No. The Zahirim likrot kavatikin, those who are careful to always daven, reach Shema and Amida like the Vatican. They can daven at the right zman to get to start their Amida with nets if they don't have a minyan at that time. Ugdola mizah, even more than that, Muchach b'Mishnah Brachot, Daf Kaf Bet. We saw based in the Mishnah in Brachot, Yarad litzbol b'chulei, regarding somebody who goes down to tefillah, whatever. Da'afilu im ein lo tefillin be'etahi gamken. Even someone who doesn't have tefillin at that time. Afilu hachi, even so, yizaher likrotab bisman. I should read Shema at that time. Samach lahanetz, right before sunrise, and then stay the Amida immediately at nets. Mishnah zo ari b'Vatikin. That Mishnah was talking about somebody who always davens Vatikin. So basically, he seems to say that those who generally are makpid always do Vatikin, they can do Vatikin even if there's no minyan at Vatikin. They can daven on their own at the Vatikin time with nets. But those who don't usually daven in that way should not give up a minyan in order to daven like Vatikin. So that's how he paskins. Okay, in the order of Sion, Ben Sion Abba Shaul also paskins. He's asked, There's no minyan at nates. There's only after nates. So can you daven on your own? So as not to miss it. So he says it again, just like we saw in the Bir Halacha, that it depends what you usually do. Tshuva. Somebody who always davens nates. Right now, but right now doesn't have such a minyan. Such a person is allowed to daven on their own, to daven at nets. Somebody who's not regularly daven with nates, they're not allowed to choose just this one day to daven with if he can't find a minyan. So basically, you can't pick and choose. You can't decide, I'm not going to shul today because I'm davening nets instead, if you don't usually daven nets. Okay, and therefore you should go and daven with a minyan. Those who are not typically careful to always do nets, you should really daven with a minyan even after nets.
What's the definition of usually?
Almost every day. Sound good?
For how long?
For how long? Do it for a week, come back to me. And don't choose this week, because this week the 7 million is exactly at notes. Do it for a month and come back to me, and then we'll discuss. Okay? Sound good?
No, I'm just being a little bit facetious, but I suppose I really want to know what it means by usually. I mean, usually, from my understanding, in halacha, is 3 times.
The point. Oh, so it doesn't. I don't think it means a chazaka. It means somebody who day in day out does this as their practice, and then they go on holiday to a town, and they only have a late minyan in that town. Can you say, I'm not going to go to shul because I'm davening nets? So you can't just do it for that week if you don't usually do that. If that's always your minhag because you really care about it as a thing, then you should continue doing that, even if it means you're doing it without a minyan. But if it's not your practice to do this in your regular life, you can't just like do it for 1 week. That's what I think what we're referring to in the poskim. But the Yalkut Yosef, again, he's really the dark horse today with different things, different chumrot. So he also says that it's not apt to what somebody usually does, but rather based on one's kavanah. That if you can do kavanah daven at nets, then you should daven at nets. Look at this in source 20. Let's read his words inside. He says as follows, the Yalkut Yosef. If there's no minyan at nets at the exact time of sunrise, then you shouldn't daven then. Even if you usually do pray at nets, unless you can concentrate well when davening. It doesn't depend on whether you usually daven nets or not, but rather what matters if you're able to concentrate throughout davening or not. And therefore, that's really what he goes by. He goes by whether one's able to retain the kavanah or not. So
why would that be time dependent?
Because I think, sorry?
About worried about going to work.
Well, there's a couple of things here. I think one is a good question. I think one of the points is really just in general that the sort of person who always davens vatikin, it's supposed to be because of they're doing it as a spiritual undertaking. It's not just because, for time, for convenience. That's what the Yalkut Yosef is really getting at here. But in addition to that, we also have the mila of one who davens without a minyan. But we say somebody who davens with a minyan, so as long as they have the minimal requirement of kavanah, that their tefillot are accepted through the power of the minyan. Whereas an individual doesn't have that sort of, like the fast track pass that a minyan has. And therefore, kavanah is paramount. It is of the utmost importance for somebody who's davening bi'echidut. So that might be why it's a significant factor here for the Yalkut Yosef.
No, but I don't. But he's only talking about a circumstance where there isn't a minyan. He doesn't say that wherever there's no minyan, you don't daven. He doesn't then go and say, but if there, is that by implication that the person waits till there is a minyan? He doesn't include that. So he's only relating it to the guy of davening yechidus at nets. It looks like me. I don't understand it. That's all.
Okay. again, I hear what you're saying. I think he's assuming that he's only really giving anyone dispensation to do the nates thing if they're going to have proper kavanah, because somebody who's not davening with a minyan requires a higher level of kavanah for their tefillot to get accepted, so to speak. But I hear what you're saying. Okay, just say that. Okay, let me just zoom down. Okay, to the next page. Okay. All right, so we discussed now the earliest time for shacharit. What is the latest time for shacharit? And then someone can get out the luchot of Chabad and work out if it works or not according to the psak of Tzurba. So let's see the latest time for shacharit. When is the latest time one is able to daven shacharit? So this goes to the beginning of the fourth perek of brachot, perek Tfilat HaShachar. There's a machloket between the Chacham and Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah in source 21 on page 295. Says the Mishnah in the beginning of the fourth perek of brachot, Tfilat HaShachar ad chatzot, that you can daven until halachic midday. Rabbi Yehuda says ad arba sha'ot, until 4 hours. Now, just to remind you again, when do we count those 4 hours from? So again, this is dependent on the machloket that we saw regarding Kriyat Shema. But according to the Magen Avraham, it's from sunrise, it's from dawn, from Alot HaShachar. But according to the Gra, it's from sunrise. And contemporary Pesach is following the Gra, certainly in a matter like this, which is Rabbanan. Okay, but either way, there's a machloket here between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda when they end, whether it's midday or after 4 hours. And the question is, when exactly in it is it, and how does the Gemara rule in this machloket between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda? So look in source 22, the Gemara later in Bracha discusses it. Amar Rav Nachman, says Rav Nachman, Av Ananami Tanin. We've also learned this in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava heyid chamisha dvarim. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava testified about 5 things, and one of them is V'al Tamid Shel Shachar, the morning korban, shekarev ba'arba sha'ot, is sacrificed by 4 hours. Shmami. Now, what do we see from there? Ad va'ad bichlal, that it means until the end of the 4th hour. Shmami. Now, that's what we conclude, that it's till the end of the 4th hour is the end time by which to daven shacharit, and we rule like Rabbi Yehuda against the Tanna Kama. Amar Rav Kahana, says Rav Kahana, halacha Rabbi Yehuda, we rule like Rabbi Yehuda that you've got to daven shacharit really by the end of 4 hours. Hol tznamba bechirata kavate, since we learnt a Mishnah in Masechet Ediyot, which is also known as bechirata, like him. And therefore, even though typically Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda, we follow Chachamim, since there's a Mefurish Mishnah in Masechet Eduyot, like Rabbi Yehuda, we follow Rabbi Yehuda, and really, you're supposed to daven by 4 hours. Now, according to this, what would it seem? It would seem that's bottom line, that if you don't daven Amida by the end of the 4th hour, it's too late to daven Shacharit. But we know that the Rishonim understand that this was only a lechatchila, and that b'di'evet, if somebody missed the first 4 hours, they can still daven until chatzot like the Chachamim. But it's not considered tefillah bismana, tefillah in the proper time. One such a Rishon is the Rambam. Over the page in source 23, the Rambam in Hilchot Tefillah Perek Gimel says as follows: Tefillat hashachar mitzvata sheyatchil hitpalel im hanetzachama uzmana ad sof sha'a revi'it. That the mitzvah of tefillah starts with sunrise and finishes by the end of the 4th hour, shishli shitayam, a third into the day. V'im avar, if a person deliberately transgressed and missed nates, o ta'a v'hitpalel acha arba ad chatzot hayom, yatsi yadei v'chovat tefillah. If one deliberately missed the first 4 hours and davened between the end of the 4th hour and midday, b'di'evet, they fulfilled the obligation of tefillah, avalo yatsa yadei chovat tefillah bismana. But so it's called tefillah, but it's not called tefillah bismana. It's not called tefillah in the proper time. Shekashem shetefillah mitzvah min Torah, just as tefillah is a mitzvah deraita, kach mitzvah midivreihem lipal ota bismana. So too, there's a mitzvah to daven it in its proper time. Kamoshe tiknu lanu chachamim uneviim, like the chachamim and the neviim established for us. And therefore, says the Rambam, really it's supposed to be within 4 hours, but b'di'eved, he does allow up to chatzot. It's just not considered tefillah bismana. Now the question is, how can he do this? The Gemara explicitly ruled like Rabbi Yehuda. The cutoff point is 4 hours. Why does he give us these extra 2 hours halachic leeway? If the Gemara paskend, it paskend. So the Bet Yosef tries to explain what the Rambam holds, that b'di'eved he rules like the Tanna Kama. How does that work? When do we ever see that? So the answer is that really there's another piece of Gemara which implies this way, and that's really what the Rambam's ruling like. Says the Bet Yosef in source 24. This is what the Rambam is based on. V'nireh, and it would seem, says the Rambam, shelamdu ken, that they learnt this from the fact the Gemara asks earlier on Kafvav, Ahad Nam, that which we said in the Mishnah, Tefillah Shachar ad Chatzot, it's got to be by midday. For 2 law, can it only be midday and not any further? Va'amar Rabbi Yochanan, surely Rabbi Yochanan said, Ta'av lo hitpalel arvit mitpalel shacharit shtayim. That we know what's the halacha. If you miss Mariv, you can daven shacharit a second time. Shacharit, if you miss shacharit, mitpalel mincha shtayim. You daven mincha a second time. The Mishani and the Gemara answers, Kule yoma matzli va'azol. You can daven all day long, but ad chatzot, until midday, yahavile schar tefillah bismana. Until midday is when you get the schar for davening so that shacharit on time. Mikan ve'elach, from that point onwards, schar tefillah yahavila. You only get reward for tefillah, but schar tefillah bismana lo yahavila. But you don't get the schar, the reward for davening tefillah in its proper time. Says the Bet Yosef. Oops. What did I do? There we go. Okay. It implies from here the afal pisha avar zman tefillah, even though he actually missed the time of davening, kule yom alavi elei schar tefillah, one still gets schar reward for davening, even if it's not on time. The lo gara kodem chatzot Rabbi Yehuda ma'achar chatzot l'koi alma. Before chatzot, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is no different if you were to daven after chatzot, so according to the Chachamim. And therefore, the Beit Yosef suggests that maybe it's from there that the Rambam got this idea, that there is some sort of leeway. Even if it's not tefillah bismana, it is still tefillah. It's difficult because the Gemara seems to say basically not like that. But the Beit Yosef himself ultimately says that that's only true regarding Tashlumin, that if you miss Shacharit, then you can daven mincha twice. But not that if you miss Shacharit, you get an extra 2 hours to daven Shacharit. And therefore, ultimately, the Bet Yosef sort of gives a different reason as to why it's okay. And that's over the page here in source 25.
And before you get there,
yeah,
when you're davening that mincha twice,
yeah, if
you miss Shacharis, you certainly missed Hanachat Tefillin.
That's an interesting question. Right? That's what you're going to ask? Okay, Baruch Shekivanten. So, then it's a real question. You asked me, when would one put on tefillin? So some people have the minhag, they will put it on for mincha. Some people just put it on and say Kriyat Shema. But what we see from here, though, it's something very important, is that the Rambam, this is ultimately the Beit Yosef has to give a different explanation, because if it was the cutoff point is 4 hours, then you should say, you missed Shacharit, so you have to daven mincha twice for Tashlumin. Where we don't have an option of this 2 hour leeway. And therefore, you can't compare it to Tashlumin. You'd be davening mincha twice when the mincha time comes, but not that you can just have 2 hours extra leeway. So the Bet Yosef ultimately has to give a different reason as to why it is that b'di'eved, according to the Rambam, if you miss 4 hours, you can daven until Chatzot. So in source 25 explains the Bet Yosef. Ella rather, mid'amri Rabbanan ad Chatzot yelfinan la. That from the fact that the Rabbanans, the Chachamim say that a person can daven until midday, we learn that you can daven. Why is it that you could daven until midday? Is because so that we don't make such a big machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan in the following manner. The Rabbi Yehuda, because according to Rabbi Yehuda, Im hit palel achar dalad sha'ot, if you daven after the 4th hour, lo yavi le schar tefillah klal, you get no reward for tefillah at all. But the Rabbanan, as according to the Rabbanan, mit palel v'holech ad chatzot, you're still allowed to daven until chatzot, v'yavi le schar tefillah bismana. And that would mean that you actually have, not only is it still the zman tefillah, but it still the zman tefillah bismana. Says the Bet Yosef, that's not conceivable. And therefore, the Rambam doesn't like that. Again, it cannot be that the cutoff point for Rebbe Yehuda is 4 hours, and if you were to, you cannot daven Shacharit afterwards at all, and you have to wait for Mincha to do Tashlumin. If, according to the Chachamim, you still daven, and not only can you still daven, but it's actually Tefillah Bismana, it's the proper time to daven. And therefore, they limit basically the scope of the Machloket. And say that rather that even in these 2 hours, Rabbi Yehuda would allow it, it's just not Tefillah Bismana. It's a bit of a dachuk answer, but that's the best thing that we have basically for the Rambam. And therefore, the Bet Yosef says in the second paragraph there in source 25, Hilkach, therefore, mema'atinan b'pluktayu. We limit the scope of their machloket. The lechole alma, that everyone really agrees, both Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim agree. Midalad shaltat chatzot, shechar tefillah yahivle, bein b'shachach, bein behezid. That between 4 hours and chatzot, those 2 hour leeway, everyone agrees that you do get the reward for davening tefillah. It's just a question about whether it's considered bismana or not. Ella, but rather the Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda, lo yavile schar tefillah bismana. It's just not considered between the 4th hour and midday is not considered tefillah bismana. The Rabbanan, whereas according to the Chachamim, yavile schar tefillah bismana. Then it is tefillah bismana. Well, according to this, but dafka katva poskim ad chatzot, and therefore it meant dafka until chatzot. Why specifically chatzot, midday? To mechatzot ulamala ad zman hamincha, but between midday and a time for mincha, which is half an hour, because you can only daven mincha from 6.5 hours. Kivan de lav zman tefillahu, since you've got this half-hour leeway, which is not the time for tefillah, klal eino mitpalel b'shum inyan. There's nothing you can daven in this half hour. The im hits palel, if a person davens in that half hour, efsha de bracha levatalaha. It might be a bracha in vain. Because again, according to the Chachamim, you can daven until 12, and halachic 12 o'clock. And according to, we can only start mincha at 12:30, halachic 12:30. So you've got a half an hour leeway where you can't daven shacharit, according to anyone, but you can't daven mincha yet. Between chatzot and mincha gedola. Yes, question?
I had a challenge. When I was flying back, I was flying into time, with time. So when I arrived in Sydney, it was, let's say, 2 o'clock. It was 1:30. So 1:30 in South Africa was 6:30. 1:30 in Sydney was 6:30 in South Africa, AM.
Okay. What's the question?
So I davened in the lounge.
Meaning, because you daven shacharit in the lounge?
Yeah, I davened shacharis in the lounge.
At 6:30 p.m. Okay.
No, not at 6:30 p.m. At 2 p.m.
You daven shacharit at 2 p.m.
2 p.m. in Sydney, which my time was Johannesburg time, was 6 a.m.
But where were you at the time?
I was in Sydney. I was on a plane. And
I understand. I hear what you're saying. So I would have, in that case, I would have davened on the plane rather than.
Normally, I would have davened on the plane. I woke up as we more or less landed.
I
was asleep.
I hear. I wouldn't have davened shacharit at 2 o'clock as a general rule. For those of us who are not Hasidish. Sorry,
this is tough.
It's a tough one. I would have said Anas Rachmana Patre and do Tashlumin because you fell asleep. I would have done mincha twice.
Yeah, I understand about the mincha twice. It's hanachos tefillin. Put on tefillin.
Okay, at 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
And you did mincha twice.
I davened Shemona Esrei twice.
Okay, say it. Very good. That's what you do in that case. If you miss. So, very good question. You have to put on tefillin for the second Shemona Esrei only. I would, if you're putting on, you put on because the first one is your mincha and the second one is tashlumin for shacharit. But once you've got them on, you kind of have them on. Seder. Okay. Fine.
That's why they've got two sets of tefillin.
2 sets of tefillin, right? Not for Shamar and Zachar, and that's something different.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Tachlis, how do we rule? So there's a whole blurb here, I'll let you read that. But fundamentally, let's just look at the final bottom line of the psak, which is that we do go with this. The Shulchan Aruch rules like his explanation in the Bet Yosef, source 26, that really the mitzvah is until the 4th hour. Then you have a 2-hour leeway where it's considered tefillah, but not tefillah bismana, like this sort of middle shitta out of deference to the Rambam. But we know after chatzot, you can't daven anything shacharit related, and you have to wait half an hour and then daven mincha twice. The ma'amidra mincha twice. So let's see that inside. This is how Shulchan Aruch rules in source 26. Zman tefillat shachar, time for shacharit, mitzvata its mitzvah is sheyatchil im hanetzachama. So again, he uses a slightly softer version. He doesn't say like the Rambam that you have to daven nates, you have to daven vatikin, but really mitzvah, the best time is obviously to do nates if you can. The time for shachar is until the end of the 4th hour, which is a third of the day time. The person made a mistake, or they fell asleep, right? Or avar, or they deliberately missed it. And they davened after 4 hours, but before midday. Even though they don't get the reward like tefillah on time, nonetheless, one does get reward for tefillah. But as the Ramah, after midday, it's forbidden to daven shacharit, and that's an important point there.
So what if you had a hefsek? So you started davening. Say my situation, you called out somewhere and you miss 3 or 4 hours of davening. You come back in the middle of davening. You continue.
Again, say the case again. I'll just turn so I can hear you.
I'm in the middle of davening. I get called out on solid call.
Uh-huh.
I don't know, there's a set of rules, I know, but it's someone is called out for whatever reason, and then come back and finish their davening, and it's already after the 4 hours.
So if then you would daven shacharit, but you haven't done Amida yet, then you would daven then. You still get you wouldn't wait to daven mincha twice. You daven shacharit then between 4 and 6, yeah. Then you wouldn't repeat mincha because you've done tefillah shacharit. It's only if you miss 4 and 6 hours, then you do mincha twice. But if you've after 4, but you would daven shacharit then and there.
We've already started when you called out.
Started what?
Started having shacharit.
Amida.
Whatever. Amida, and you've got called out.
If you get called out, but you get called out. But if it's a hefsek, like if there's a hefsek and you're talking and stuff, you'd have to start the Amida again.
You're called out for 3 or 4 hours, so it's quite feasible.
So then I would say Birukot Kriyat Shema, or just say sorry the paragraphs of Shema and then do Amida.
Why wouldn't it be? What about an Isaac mitzvah, Potama mitzvah?
Yeah, we're talking about when he finishes. Yeah. If it's still before Chatzot, I would still daven.
Right. But during that period of time.
During that time, he's busy. Right? He's pater, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Ironically, one of the few mitzvot that Osik b'mitzvah pater min mitzvah does not apply to is Talmud Torah. On the one hand, we say the Talmud Torah keneged kulam, but we don't say, I'm sorry, right now, I'm sorry, we can't end the shir at 9:30. We can't daven Ma'ariv at 9:30. I'm in a shir. So you can't say such a thing when it comes to Torah. Talmud Torah, the rule of Osek b'mitzvah pater min mitzvah does not apply. 2 different explanations I heard. One is that of the Tzurba Shiur, Rabbi Chanan Wasserman. He explained that there's no chova of Talmud Torah at a time when there's a mitzvah of Veret. When there's another mitzvah to do, the obligation of Talmud Torah doesn't
fall away.
It falls away. Okay.
Yep.
But Rav Lichtenstein's Sal, he had a different explanation, similar but slightly different, and he just said, not that for the formality of the obligation falls away when there's another mitzvah, but simply that if you are going to ignore a mitzvah because you're too busy learning, like that's not Torah. It's not what God wants. Like it's not Torah. So forget chova or not chova. It's like not Torah. How can you say I'm sorry I can't daven? I'm too busy learning. Like that's not. It's not Ratzon Hashem. This is not Torah. And that's sort of how his take on it. So you just reminded me of that because Osik mitzvah pratim min mitzvah. Okay. Beseder. So we've seen that ideally it's got to be, obviously nates is the best. If you don't have nates, then after nates. If you're going to work before nates, we saw the Psaka of Moshe Feinstein who allows the chatchila before nates if you're not going to do nates, although others disagree. And then we saw that the end time is really the 4th hour, like Rabbi Yehuda. If you can't do it by the 4th hour, then at least by chatzot. And you get at least tefillah, even if it's not tefillah bismana. Only if a person misses chatzot, then they would have to do the amida of mincha twice as tashlumin to make up the missing shacharit. Okay. But the Mishnah Berurah has something more to add to this. Yes?
Go for it. Interesting to know. Each of these Rabbanim have given a definite time. This is where we finish. And another rabbi has come along and given some leeway or less leeway.
Mm-hmm.
Do these rabbis who have given a definite time have a leeway?
They have a leeway?
Yeah.
So I think Rabbi Yehuda himself, well, how we understand him, Paskin, that there is this 2-hour leeway.
Yeah.
The Chachamim who say Chatzot is the cutoff,
yeah,
they have no leeway. Chatzot is the end. and therefore it's really it's a red tape for them. Chatzot. Rabbi Yehuda, as we understand him, we said that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't think that 4 hours is a red tape. Rather, it's the end of Tefillah Bismana. And b'di'evet, you have 2 hours where he concedes to the opinion of Chachamim that you do get Schar Tefillah, but it's not Tefillah Bismana. But the Chachamim who said that midday was the cutoff, for them it's a red tape. No one says you can daven shacharit after halachic midday. You'd have to wait half an hour and daven mincha twice, or wait for mincha and daven twice. So that would be a red tape for the Chachamim.
Sitting with the story we read in the Haggadah, where they go, years months.
So that was they were up all night. That was up all night. They were up all night. That's okay. You can't be up all day, but you can be up all night. So.
And you get the feeling that the time for reading Shema was by midnight, and extended a bit. And now it's already dawn.
But no, the time is dawn. Dawn is the cutoff point. But Chazal added a bound beginning of bracha. You're quoting, right? Chazal added a gezerah, like a boundary, that a geder that till chatzot, so you don't forget. Yeah. But that's not a leeway. That's they don't want you to forget Shema. Where here we're saying that there's this sort of twilight zone between 4 hours and 6 hours where it's tefillah but not tefillah bismana. But everyone agrees after chatzot you can't make up shacharit. You've got to do mincha twice. Okay, the Mishnah Berurah though qualifies that this to do with your question, Michael. The Mishnah Berurah has a little bit to add here in source 27 though, when it comes to after the 4th hour. Let's say you're called out for a call, but you get back after the 4th hour before the 6th. That really it depends. In your case, it would be okay. But what about somebody who deliberately missed shacharit? Look at source 27. Says Mr. Berurah, but tavshi palel as b'torah nadava. If you're davening between the 4th hour and the 6th hour and having deliberately missed shacharit, which would not be your case in Hatzalah because you couldn't help it. Somebody who deliberately got up late, they should only daven shacharit now as a nadava. It's like a voluntary tefillah. Ki yesh poskim shesovrim shtebehezid ad daled shaot shuv lo matzil mitpalel klal. Because some hold that somebody who deliberately waited till after the 4th hour to daven shacharit cannot make up for it. Al ken, therefore, says the Mishnah, what should you do? Eat palel, a person who deliberately waited till after the 4th hour should daven. V'yatneh, make the following condition. She'im mitzad hadin hu patur hu b'torah nadava. That if somebody is exempt here, then this is a nadava only. Again, what does it mean like exempt? It means that it's too late to daven, basically. Then this is a nadava, okay? And therefore, somebody basically...
So it's not a bracha levatala, it's a nadava.
Exactly, in order to avoid it being the risk of it being a bracha levatala. And based on everything that we've said also, what about if somebody just davened any sort of tefillah between chatzot and 12:30, right? Well, halachic 12:30, because it's not the time for shacharit, but it's not the time for mincha yet either. So the question is, how do we paskin that there? That's really the question as well. So we paskin as follows. In source 28 says the Mishnah Berurah, Bachar chatzot. If somebody davened after midday, mashma l'shon harav, from the Rav, here's the Ramah. But the implication is that the cutoff point is literally halachic midday, and afterwards you may not daven shacharit. V'yesh makilin. He adds though that there are those who are lenient. Some people do allow b'di'evet, in contrast to what I said before, to allow you to daven shacharit actually to halachic 12:30. But according to the letter of the law, mashma prima gadim v'derech she'ein lezuzim v'sag harav. But really, you're supposed to follow the Ramah in this, and you're supposed to paskin that really the cutoff is 12 o'clock, halachic midday. And that's what the Gra paskins. The be'emek kvar gias man mincha shemitchilat sheva ele mitam she'enan bakiyim v'shem yavolo latot v'alkein asru chazal. Because strictly speaking, mincha time is from midday. We have the practice based on Chazal that we wait till 12:30, halachic 12:30, to daven mincha, because that way we know that the sun has gone slightly over halfway, and therefore we know it's definitely the afternoon now. That's Chazal had as a gezerah. But strictly speaking, 12 o'clock, halachic midday, is not 12 o'clock, halachic 12 o'clock is already mincha time, and therefore you should not daven shacharit after halachic midday. Al Ken, therefore, he adds, Kasher Shagag or Ne'anas, the person made a mistake or was forced, and you couldn't daven yet. You should not daven in this half an hour, but what should you do? As I said earlier, Yamtin ad achar Yamtin achar. You wait halachic midday half an hour. Dehainu kadesh yagizman tefillah mincha, for the time for mincha obligation to start. The palel mincha. Then you daven mincha. V'achar kach shachrit b'torah hashlama v'lo lehefech. And then you daven a second amida to make up for shacharit. But gam dafka b'shagag or ne'anas. Even the option for tashlumin is only if a person couldn't help it, they called out for a hatzalah call, or they were b'shogeg, they forgot. Al-b'mezid, as we know, the Gemara in Bracha tells us, somebody who deliberately misses a tefillah, ein lo takana, has no fix. You cannot fix if you deliberately skip a tefillah. Omnam b'diavad and b'dieved, im hitpalel shachrit b'chatzi shazol achachatzot. If by mistake somebody did daven Shachrit between 12 and 12:30, and halachic 12 and 12:30. Yatsa the aim shachrit payal shenit, but the eved we say that's enough and don't make a tashlumim for your shachrit based on the more lenient opinion. But strictly speaking, you should not be davening after lachat chila after 12 o'clock. We've got to run now to Mariv, and we'll end things there. I remind you all, Rav Ramon is giving here at 8:30 on Thursday. So I hope to see you all there, Bezrat Hashem. If not,
and he's also going to be at L1.
At L1, lunch. Yes, lunch. He's going to be talking about cultured meat. There's a big machloket now in Israel about what to do with artificial meat. Is it fleischig? Is it milk? Is it parav? What's the deal? And shrita and the like. So it'll be very interesting. And I hope to see you at the various shiurim. Have a good evening.
Good night.